My name is Emily Walker, and I am 32 years old now. Looking back on the road that led me here, a freelance graphic designer in Chicago with my own business, I can say without hesitation that the path was anything but smooth. If you had asked me 20 years ago whether I would ever build a life on my own terms, I probably would have laughed bitterly. For as long as I can remember, I grew up in the heavy, suffocating shadow of my older brother, Daniel Walker. Our childhood looked perfect from the outside. We lived in a neat two-story colonial house in a quiet suburb just outside of Minneapolis. White picket fence, a backyard big enough for summer barbecues, ski trips every winter, 4th of July fireworks in the cul-de-sac. It was the kind of postcard family image neighbors envied. But what no one saw behind those walls was the constant comparison, the daily reminder that I was the lesser child, the disappointment. Daniel was 5 years older than me and, to my parents, he was the very definition of perfection. Dad Robert bragged endlessly about his straight-A report cards, the trophies that lined his shelves from swim meets, debate team championships, and chess tournaments. Mom Linda gushed to relatives about his discipline, his impeccable manners, his bright future. Teachers adored him. Coaches admired him. Neighbors commented on what a polite young man he was. To everyone, he was the golden boy. And then there was me. When I brought home a B+ in math, Dad sighed. Daniel never got anything less than an A. When I stumbled through a science project, Mom shook her head and reminded me, Daniel won the state science fair when he was even younger than you. The words stung like bee stings, small but relentless, until I carried them everywhere. I tried desperately to win their approval. I practiced piano pieces until my fingers cramped, hoping that music might set me apart. At my recital, after I played a Mozart sonata, Mom's only comment was, Daniel mastered Chopin by your age. My triumph vanished in an instant. Later, when I joined the art club and discovered I had a natural gift for painting, I thought maybe, just maybe, I had found my place. My watercolor piece won first place in a local competition. Beaming, I carried it home, expecting them to be proud. Dad barely glanced at it before saying, Art is a nice hobby, Emily, but it won't get you anywhere in life. Daniel is taking advanced placement courses. That's what will matter in the real world. My painting ended up stuffed in my closet while Daniel's debate certificates were framed and hung in the living room for every visitor to admire. Even our extended family joined in the chorus. Thanksgiving dinners became a tradition of humiliation. Relatives asked Daniel about his awards and future plans, eyes shining with admiration, then turned to me with that pitying smile. And what about you, Emily? Still doodling those little pictures? Their tone made it clear they saw my artistic pursuits as childish distractions compared to Daniel's serious accomplishments. It was as if I was invisible in my own home. At the dinner table, conversations revolved around Daniel, his latest achievement, his future at some prestigious university. Whenever I tried to share something about my day or a small victory at school, the subject shifted back to him within seconds. Eventually, I learned to eat quietly, excusing myself early so I could retreat to my room. There, alone with my sketchbooks, I built worlds where my worth wasn't measured against anyone else's. By the time I reached high school, I had developed a protective shell. I stopped competing. What was the point? Instead, I funneled my energy into art. I enrolled in every art and design class my school offered, stayed late in the studio, and poured myself into building a portfolio. One person noticed what my family never did. Mrs. Thornton, my art teacher, became my lifeline. One afternoon, as I hunched over a digital design project, she stood beside me and said softly, Emily, you have a unique perspective. Your brother may excel in academics, but you have a gift that's just as valuable. Don't forget that. Her words clung to me like a life raft. The stark difference in how my parents treated us became undeniable when we graduated. When Daniel walked across his high school stage, my parents threw an extravagant celebration. They rented a tent for the backyard, hired caterers, and invited neighbors, relatives, and even his teachers. Dad gave a 20-minute speech about Daniel's achievements and his bright future at an Ivy League university. The air was thick with champagne toasts and glowing pride. 4 years later, when it was my turn, there was no tent, no party, no speech. We went to a chain restaurant for a quick dinner. Mom snapped a few photos, but she spent most of the evening talking about Daniel's internship at a prestigious financial firm. When I mentioned I'd been accepted to the Art Institute of Chicago on a partial scholarship, Dad frowned. "Are you sure about this art school thing, Emily? It's not too late to apply to a real university, something with better career prospects." Mom nodded in agreement, her voice sugar-coated but sharp. "Your brother is already setting himself up for success. We just want the same for you, honey." But I knew the truth. What they really meant was, "We want you to be just like Daniel." And for the first time in my life, I realized I never would be. Despite the sting, that realization carried a strange sense of relief. I wasn't Daniel, and maybe that wasn't a bad thing. When the day came to leave for college, the contrast was once again staggering. For Daniel, my parents had taken a week off work, driven him to his campus, met his roommate's family, and treated everyone to an expensive dinner. For me, they drove me down on a Saturday morning, unloaded my boxes into my dorm room, and were back on the road by mid-afternoon, saying they had to be at work Monday. Their disappointment in my choice was palpable. Dad scoffed when I declared my major. Graphic design? What kind of stable career will that lead to? Daniel studied economics and finance. Those are fields with real prospects. Mom tried to soften the blow but still twisted the knife. "We just want you to be able to support yourself. This art thing feels so uncertain." What they didn't know was that I had been preparing for independence my entire life. Unlike Daniel, whose education had been fully funded, I knew I would largely be on my own. My scholarship covered only half my tuition. Everything else was up to me. And so began the first step of my journey, the moment I finally breathed my own air after years of suffocation. By the time I reached high school, I was no longer the eager little girl begging for scraps of validation. I had built a wall around myself, a thin, fragile shield, but enough to dull the sharpest edges of my parents' words. After years of hearing, "Why can't you be more like Daniel?" I finally accepted a truth that gnawed at me day and night. I would never win in their eyes. So I stopped trying to play their game. While Daniel stacked up academic medals and Ivy League promises, I turned inward, finding refuge in the only place where I didn't feel like a failure: art. The art room became my sanctuary, a sacred space that smelled of acrylic paint, graphite dust, and clay. I would stay after school until the janitor flicked the lights to remind me it was closing time. With every brushstroke, every line of charcoal across paper, I carved out a world where I wasn't less than Daniel. No, but the silence at home was deafening. At the dinner table, the pattern never changed. "Dad, Daniel's debate team is heading to regionals." "Mom, he just got another letter from Princeton. Can you believe how advanced he is at his age?" And me? Invisible. When I did speak up, when I dared to mention winning a ribbon at an art show or finishing a mural for the school hallway, their response was a polite nod at best. Sometimes not even that. My words dissolved into the clatter of silverware. It was in those moments that the bitterness took root, burning like acid in my chest. I wasn't just overlooked, I was erased. The only person who ever seemed to notice me was Mrs. Thornton, my high school art teacher. She was in her 40s, always dressed in earthy colors smeared with streaks of paint, her hands perpetually ink-stained. She had the kind of eyes that looked right through you, not in judgment, but in understanding. One afternoon, she leaned over my shoulder as I hunched over a digital design project, my heart pounding as if my life depended on it. "Emily," she said softly, "you have something rare, a way of seeing the world that no textbook can teach. Daniel may ace his exams, but this," she gestured at the glowing design on my screen, "this is a gift. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Her words hit me like sunlight through a cracked window. I nodded, too choked up to respond, but inside I clung to them like a drowning girl clutching driftwood. Yet even with her encouragement, the comparisons never stopped. The difference in how our family celebrated milestones was brutal. When Daniel graduated, our backyard looked like a wedding venue. My parents rented a white canopy tent, hired caterers, and invited neighbors, relatives, even his teachers. Dad stood in front of everyone with a microphone, delivering a 20-minute speech about Daniel's brilliance, his scholarship offers, his inevitable future as a leader in finance. Guests clapped, champagne glasses clinked, and my mother's eyes glistened with pride. 4 years later, when it was my turn, there was no tent, no microphone, no catered feast. Just a quick dinner at a chain restaurant, the kind with sticky vinyl booths and laminated menus. Mom took a few photos with her disposable camera, but her conversation drifted quickly back to Daniel's new internship at a prestigious Wall Street firm. When I told them I'd been accepted into the Art Institute of Chicago with a partial scholarship, Dad frowned. "Emily, are you sure about this art school thing? It's not too late to apply to a real university, something with better prospects." Mom added gently, "Your brother is already on track for a successful career. We just want the same for you, honey." But the truth was laid bare in her eyes. "We don't want you to be you. We want you to be him." I remember staring at my plate of untouched pasta, the taste of betrayal bitterer than anything I could swallow. In that moment, it hit me with a force I couldn't escape. No matter how hard I tried, no matter what I achieved, I would always be measured against Daniel and found lacking. And yet beneath the humiliation there was a flicker of defiance. If they couldn't see me, I would learn to see myself. Leaving for college was like breaking the surface after nearly drowning. The distance from Minneapolis to Chicago wasn't just 400 miles, it was a liberation. For Daniel, my parents had taken a week off work, met his roommate's family, toured his dorm, treated everyone to an expensive dinner. For me, they drove down on a Saturday, carried a couple of boxes up to my room, and were gone by mid-afternoon. Their disappointment clung to me like smoke. Dad scoffed when I told him my major. Graphic design? What kind of stable career is that? Daniel studied economics. Real fields. Real future. Mom tried to soften the blow, her hand brushing my arm. "We just want you to be able to support yourself. This art thing, it feels uncertain." But what they didn't realize was that I had been preparing for this independence all my life. Daniel's education had been fully funded by my parents. Mine wasn't. My scholarship covered half my tuition, but the rest, rent, food, books, supplies, would fall squarely on me. Within a week, I had lined up 2 jobs, morning shifts at a coffee shop starting at 5 a.m., and weekend hours at a small local print shop owned by Arthur Hayes, an old-school graphic designer with a brusque manner and a surprisingly tender heart. "You've got a good eye, kid," he told me one Saturday as I adjusted the layout of a business card. "Better than half the design graduates I've seen come through here." His words, like Mrs. Thornton's before, settled deep into me, proof that I wasn't crazy for believing in myself, proof that maybe, just maybe, my path mattered. My schedule was grueling. I'd wake at 4:30 a.m., sling coffee until 9, rush to classes, then work on freelance projects I scraped together from bulletin boards and online forums until midnight. My tiny dorm room was littered with sketch pads and empty coffee cups, my fingers constantly ink-stained or blistered from the mouse. But for the first time in my life, I felt alive. Exhausted, yes, but alive. And when Rachel Miller, my photography major roommate from Seattle, saw the poster I designed for a student film festival, her reaction stunned me. "Emily, this is incredible. You have such a distinctive style. I've never seen composition like this." Her praise hit me like a language I'd never heard before. Foreign, shocking, but deeply beautiful. I had spent years choking on comparison, and now, at last, someone saw me. Slowly, carefully, in the cracks left by my parents' neglect, my self-confidence began to grow. By my second year at the Art Institute of Chicago, the walls I had built around myself began to crack not from pain but from unexpected light. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who valued creativity, who didn't measure worth by report cards or trophies. Professors challenged me not to mimic, but to imagine. Classmates admired rather than belittled, and strangers looked at my work with genuine awe. One professor in particular, Professor Richard Campbell, a tall man with a stern voice and gentle eyes, pulled me aside after an advanced typography class. "Miss Walker," he said, his tone unusually soft. "In 20 years of teaching, I rarely see the kind of instinct you have for visual hierarchy. You understand how people's eyes move across a page, how emotion is carried in shape and space. Have you considered applying for the Meridian Design internship this summer?" I almost laughed. Me? The girl who was never good enough? But his gaze was steady, and for the first time, I dared to believe him. I applied, terrified, and to my shock, I was accepted. That internship opened doors I didn't even know existed. And slowly, a future I had never allowed myself to picture came into view. But back home, nothing had changed. Every phone call with my parents followed the same script. They would ask a perfunctory question about my classes, then spend 20 minutes gushing about Daniel's rising career on Wall Street. "Your brother just got promoted," Dad would say with pride dripping in every syllable. "He's moving into a luxury apartment," Mom chimed in. "His bonus this year is probably more than you'll make after graduation," Dad added, not even attempting to hide the sting. Each call was another reminder. In their eyes, my achievements would never shine bright enough to outglow Daniel's golden halo. So I called less and less. Instead, I threw myself into my work. By senior year, I had won several student design competitions, secured a job offer at a boutique agency in Chicago, and even had my work featured in a faculty exhibition curated by Professor Campbell. "You should invite your parents," he encouraged. "It's a big deal, Emily. They'll be proud to see your work displayed among professionals." And though I tried to choke down the old fear, a flicker of hope rose inside me. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe, finally, they would see me. I called them, voice trembling despite my effort to sound casual. "Only 3 students were selected," I explained. It's a really big honor." There was a pause. Then Mom's distracted voice came through the line. "That sounds nice, honey, but we probably won't make it to your graduation. Your father has some important meetings that week, and Daniel is taking us to Bermuda. He's using his airline miles. You understand, right?" Her words were so casual, so offhand, that for a second I thought I had misheard. But no, she was clear. They weren't coming. The line buzzed in my ear as I forced myself to swallow. "Yeah," I whispered. "I understand." Graduation day arrived, and I sat among hundreds of students in my cap and gown, staring out into the crowd. There were parents waving, siblings cheering, families holding banners. Everywhere I looked, joy spilled over in hugs and tears. My seat remained empty, but I wasn't truly alone. Rachel was there, camera in hand, cheering louder than anyone. Arthur Hayes, my gruff mentor from the print shop, brought his wife and a bouquet of flowers so bright it nearly blinded me. Professor Campbell shook my hand firmly as I walked across the stage, his pride radiating in a way I had never seen from my own father. That night, as we celebrated in a small restaurant tucked in a quiet Chicago street, I realized something life-altering. I didn't need my parents' approval anymore. I had built my own family, my own support system, people who saw me, valued me, celebrated me not because I was Daniel's sister, but because I was Emily. The realization was both liberating and devastating. Liberating because I was free from the endless chase of their recognition. Devastating because it meant accepting that I might never have the love I had once longed for. The first few years after graduation were brutal. I started at Horizon Design, a small but respected agency. My pay barely covered rent for a cramped studio apartment and the crushing weight of student loans. My desk was secondhand, my computer constantly crashing under the weight of design software, and my meals were little more than dollar store pasta and canned soup. But I was determined. While Daniel lived in luxury apartments and dined in expensive restaurants, I stretched every dollar, meal prepped every Sunday, and scoured bulletin boards for free networking events where I could sneak in appetizers while pitching myself to potential clients. Every dollar mattered. And then, 8 months in, my phone rang. It was Mom. Her voice trembled in a way I had never heard before. "Emily, your father is sick. The doctors found something in his heart. He needs surgery, but the insurance doesn't cover everything. We don't know how we'll manage the bills." For a moment, the world tilted. Dad, the unshakable pillar who had sneered at every B+ I ever brought home, was fragile. Human. Dying, maybe. And despite everything, despite the years of neglect, my heart broke. "How much do you need?" I asked without hesitation. The number she whispered was enough to gut my savings, but I didn't hesitate. I transferred it the next morning. I told myself it was family, that no matter the wounds, family was family. I didn't know it then, but that single decision would chain me to years of sacrifice, draining me in ways I could never have imagined. The months after my father's surgery bled together in a blur of exhaustion. What started as a one-time transfer to cover hospital bills quickly became a monthly obligation. Medications, follow-up appointments, therapy sessions, there was always something. Mom had cut back her hours at work to care for Dad, and the financial gap seemed endless. So I stepped in. At first, it was $500 a month, a massive chunk of my entry-level salary at Horizon Design. Each transfer felt like carving flesh off my own body, but I told myself it was the right thing. Family comes first. That's what I repeated when my rent check bounced once, when I maxed out my credit card to keep the lights on, when I skipped meals because groceries had to wait. One evening, desperate, I asked quietly, "Is Daniel helping too?" The line went silent. Mom cleared her throat. "Your brother is at a critical point in his career, honey. He has mortgage payments, country club dues. He's saving for a partnership buy-in at his firm. He's stretched thin." I almost dropped the phone. Stretched thin? Daniel with his six-figure salary, his luxury apartment, his tailored suits? Meanwhile, I was living on ramen noodles and caffeine, working 70-hour weeks just to keep my own head above water. But their tone was final. Daniel's money was for Daniel's future. Mine, apparently, was for everyone else's survival. The bitterness grew like a thorn lodged under my skin. Even as I wired money month after month, the comparisons never ceased. Once, after handing Mom an envelope of cash I'd earned from a brutal freelance project, she sighed wistfully. "Daniel just bought a vacation property in Aspen. Isn't he thoughtful? He said we can use it any time." Her voice dripped with admiration, as if generosity was measured in ski lodges and luxury. I bit down so hard on my tongue I tasted blood. The irony was unbearable. I was the one literally paying their bills, and yet Daniel, who contributed nothing, was praised as the dutiful son. So I worked harder. Nights blurred into mornings. My cramped apartment became a graveyard of half-empty coffee cups, crumpled sketches, and design drafts lit by the cold glow of my computer screen. My social life evaporated. Friends stopped inviting me out. They knew my answer would be, "Sorry, deadline." The pressure gnawed at my health. Migraines split my skull, dark circles etched themselves under my eyes, and my hands trembled from too much coffee and too little rest. But every month, without fail, I sent the money. 3 years into this routine, an envelope arrived in the mail, thick, elegant, cream-colored. I opened it with trembling fingers. "Daniel Walker and Sophia Grant request the honor of your presence at their wedding. The venue, an exclusive resort in Napa Valley. Dress code, black tie." My chest tightened. Just attending would cost me nearly $2,000 airfare, hotel, a dress, a gift. Money I didn't have, not with my monthly transfers draining me dry. But how could I not go? Not attending would ignite a family war I wasn't prepared to face. So I took on yet another freelance contract, designing a massive furniture catalog. I worked through weekends, nights, every spare second, until my body ached with fatigue. By the time the wedding rolled around, I had maxed out my credit card on a plane ticket and bought the cheapest black dress that could pass for formal wear. The event itself was a spectacle: crystal chandeliers dangling from the ceiling, champagne fountains overflowing, floral centerpieces that probably cost more than my monthly rent. And my parents? They glowed with pride. "This," Dad told Uncle Stephen as I passed by, "this is success. Daniel has secured his future with this marriage. Look at the people here. These are the circles he belongs to now." Uncle Stephen glanced toward me. "And Emily? How's she doing?" Dad's response sliced through me. He waved a dismissive hand. "She's still figuring things out. You know how artists are, always struggling." I froze. My lungs locked. Still figuring things out? I had been sending them money for 3 years. I had sacrificed sleep, health, joy, everything to keep them afloat. And still, in his eyes, I was the struggling, directionless daughter. While Daniel, who hadn't spared a single dollar for them, was the hero. That night, alone in my cheap hotel room, I broke. Tears poured until my body shook. It wasn't just hurt, it was the crushing realization that I was trapped. I could keep bleeding myself dry forever, and they would never see me. Never. But even then, I didn't stop sending money. Because they were my parents. Because some part of me still prayed that if I gave enough, if I proved myself enough, one day they would finally look at me with pride. Meanwhile, my career inched forward. By my 5th year in the industry, the relentless grind started paying off. I left Horizon Design for a larger agency, doubling my salary. My portfolio expanded to include campaigns for national brands, and design blogs started featuring my work. I was invited to conferences, speaking on how traditional design could merge with digital experiences. At 29, trembling with equal parts terror and exhilaration, I launched my own studio, Prism Design. I rented a small office in a converted warehouse in Chicago's West Loop, bought professional equipment, and hired a part-time assistant. The first months were terrifying. Would clients come? Would I survive? But slowly, they did. Former clients followed me. New ones came through referrals. And little by little, Prism Design grew. And still, even as I hustled to keep my dream alive, I never missed a transfer. By then, it had risen to $800 a month. For 8 years, through lean months and late fees, I never failed them. Yet the recognition I longed for never came. Calls with Mom revolved around Daniel's promotions, his Hamptons beach house, his upcoming baby, his lavish gifts. "Daniel's flying us business class to Europe this summer," she gushed once. "Isn't that generous?" Generous. The word lodged in my chest like a stone. He could afford those grand gestures precisely because he wasn't the one paying their bills. That was me. Quietly, consistently, invisibly. When I tried to share my own success winning an industry award, expanding my team, Mom responded with a distracted, "That's nice, honey. Oh, did I tell you Daniel just bought another property?" My achievements evaporated in the shadow of his. So I stopped trying. I stopped telling them anything. Our relationship became transactional. My role, the silent provider. Their focus, Daniel's endless glory. And I told myself I could endure it. Until one day, the cracks split open and everything I had buried came spilling out. The years blurred together in a haze of deadlines and sacrifice, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, my life began to change. Prism Design grew. Clients returned, new contracts rolled in, and my name started to circulate in Chicago's design community. By my early 30s, I was no longer the exhausted entry-level employee scrambling for rent. I was a studio owner, leading a team, creating work that appeared in magazines and national campaigns. And yet, every single month, without fail, I wired $800 home. For 8 years, I had been the quiet lifeline that kept my parents afloat. But you wouldn't know it listening to them. Every call still orbited around Daniel. Daniel just got promoted to senior vice president. No. Daniel and Sophia bought a second home in the Hamptons. Daniel's sending us to Europe this summer business class, of course. Isn't he thoughtful? The word thoughtful burned through me like acid. They gushed over his gifts, his trips, his expensive dinners, grand gestures that were only possible because I was covering the everyday bills. I wanted to scream, "He can afford that lifestyle because I'm the one paying for your medications, your utilities, your groceries," but I swallowed it. Every time. When I shared my own victories, a national award, a major campaign launch, their responses were lukewarm at best. "That's nice, honey. Oh, have you seen the photos Daniel sent of their new place on the beach?" My achievements dissolved, like ink in water. So I stopped trying. I stopped telling them anything. Our calls became shorter, colder, revolving solely around logistics, money, schedules, obligations. It wasn't family anymore. It was a transaction. One particularly brutal quarter, when I was juggling overlapping client projects, I missed their calls for 3 weeks. By the time I finally had a breath to return it, Dad's voice on the other end was icy. "Well, look who remembered she has parents." I apologized, explained the workload, but he was uninterested. Instead, he asked pointed questions about my business, my finances. Was I stable? Was the studio making money? The tone was sharp, probing, almost suspicious. At the time, I thought maybe, just maybe, it was concern. Maybe, at last, they were starting to care about my world. I couldn't have been more wrong. A month later, I decided to surprise them. I had a client meeting in Minneapolis and thought, why not? I hadn't been home in over a year. Despite the tension, I missed them. I didn't call ahead. I imagined the look of delight on Mom's face, Dad's surprise, maybe even pride when I told them about Prism Design's success. But when I pulled into the driveway, my chest tightened. Parked in front of the garage was a sleek, unfamiliar SUV luxury, expensive. I rang the bell, clutching a gift bag with a silk scarf for Mom and an expensive bottle of scotch for Dad. When the door opened, Mom's expression wasn't joy. It was shock. "Emily, what are you doing here?" Before I could answer, a voice floated from inside. "Mom, who is it?" And then Daniel appeared, coffee mug in hand, dressed casually as though he lived there. The world tilted. We sat in the living room, the air thick with unease. Mom nervously offered coffee, Dad avoided my eyes, and Daniel, usually arrogant, loud, commanding, was strangely quiet. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. "Your brother has been staying with us for a while, just until he gets back on his feet." Back on his feet? The golden boy with the corner office and luxury homes? None of it made sense. "What happened?" I asked, staring at Daniel. His facade cracked. He admitted he'd lost his job nearly a year ago. Downsized. Despite his connections, he couldn't land another. His marriage had crumbled under financial strain. Sophia left, the assets tied up in her name or in divorce proceedings. He'd been living with our parents ever since. I sat frozen, blood roaring in my ears. For nearly a year, they had kept this from me. For nearly a year, I had been sending money, thinking it was for Dad's health, when in reality, I'd been supporting Daniel. The betrayal was a blade to the gut. But I didn't scream, I didn't accuse. I asked quiet questions, trying to piece together just how deep the lies ran. 2 weeks later, the other shoe dropped. I was working late at my studio when Dad called. His voice was tense, hesitant. "Emily, we've had some increased expenses. The medication costs more. The house needs repairs. Property taxes went up. We were wondering if you could send an extra $300 each month. It would help a lot." I closed my eyes, the old mix of obligation and resentment rising like bile. But this time something new surged inside me, anger. I asked carefully, "Is this for your expenses? Or for Daniel?" There was a pause. Then Dad snapped, "What difference does it make? We're family. We support each other." I felt heat rising up my neck. "That's exactly my point, Dad. I've been supporting you and Mom for 8 years. I've never missed a payment, even when I couldn't make rent. Meanwhile, Daniel has contributed—" "What, exactly?" Mom's voice suddenly chimed in. She must have been listening on the other line. "Your brother is going through a difficult time, Emily. He lost everything. He needs us." That, her words sliced through me. "And I've been losing my financial freedom for nearly a decade," I snapped. "But you never cared, because it's just me, just Emily, the lesser child." Dad bristled. "That's not fair. Isn't it?" My voice trembled with fury. "When was the last time you asked about my business, my life, my struggles? It's always been about Daniel, even now when I'm the one paying your bills." The conversation spiraled, years of bitterness bursting through. They defended Daniel, begged me to understand how hard job hunting was, how depressed he was after his divorce, how he needed family more than ever. Finally, Dad spoke the words that detonated everything. "Emily, try to understand. Your brother had real success, a real career. He fell from a great height. Your graphic design thing, it's different. You'll never be as good as him. You haven't lost what he lost." The words hit harder than any blow. After everything I had given, everything I had endured, they still believed Daniel's fall mattered more than my entire life. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. "Then ask him to pay the bills," I said, my voice steady though my hands shook. "Because I'm done. I'm not sending money anymore." There was a gasp. "What money?" Mom said sharply. "Emily, we never received a single dollar from you. The floor dropped beneath me. "What did you just say?" I whispered. "I said we never received money from you," Mom repeated, confusion genuine in her tone. "Aside from that one time after Dad's surgery, nothing regular. What are you talking about?" My vision blurred. My chest constricted. 8 years of transfers, 8 years of sacrifice, and now they were telling me they never got it? "Mom?" My voice cracked. "I've been sending $800 a month for 4 years. $500 before that. For 8 years. Are you telling me you never saw any of it?" Silence. Whispered voices on the other end. Finally, Dad spoke, low and uneasy. "Emily, we never received any regular payments from you." The truth slammed into me like a freight train. Who had access to their accounts? Who could move money without their knowledge? There was only one answer. Daniel. When the call ended, I sat frozen in my studio, the phone still pressed to my ear, though the line had long gone silent. My chest rose and fell in shallow gasps. 8 years. 8 years of grueling sacrifice, my health, my youth, my joy gone, and now my parents claimed they never saw a cent? My mind raced. Who handles their banking? Who has access? The answer was immediate and sickening. Daniel. The golden child, the pride of the family, the one who had fallen from greatness. He hadn't just fallen, he had been feeding off me like a parasite all along. My hands trembled as I opened my laptop. I scrolled through bank records, transfer after transfer, each one highlighted in mocking rows of numbers. Every month, without fail, money wired into what I had believed was my parents' joint account. But now, with horror tightening around my throat, I realized the truth. It must have been an account Daniel could access. For 8 years, I hadn't been supporting my parents. I had been funding Daniel's life. I sat there for hours, staring at the evidence, rage and disbelief crashing against each other until I could barely breathe. Finally, with shaking hands, I began printing. Page after page of bank statements, each transfer a nail in the coffin of my naivety. I organized them into a binder, neat and damning, creating a timeline of my exploitation. But I knew it wasn't enough. I needed proof that no one could deny. A client of mine, a lawyer, listened quietly as I poured out the story over coffee. His face tightened with each detail. "You need someone who specializes in financial fraud," he said finally. "I'll connect you with someone. He's expensive, but he's good." That's how I met Trevor Cole, a private investigator with silver hair, steady eyes, and the kind of calm that only comes from unraveling ugly truths for a living. "This kind of family fraud is more common than you'd think," he told me in our first meeting. His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "Especially when one child is seen as the golden one. The others get dismissed, and secrets slip through the cracks." For 3 weeks, Trevor dug deep. He traced transfers, subpoenaed records, followed the paper trail where my eyes had blurred. And when he came back, the weight of his findings nearly crushed me. "Within days of each of your deposits," he explained, sliding documents across the table, "Daniel moved the money into his personal account. Sometimes he forged checks using your father's signature. Other times, he made direct electronic transfers. Over 8 years, he siphoned about $75,000. $75,000. The number stabbed through me. That was a down payment on a home. The student loans that had kept me awake at night. Investments I could have made in my business. $75,000 that could have been mine. My freedom, my security, my future. Instead, it had propped up Daniel's illusion of success. I stared at the evidence, his signatures, the bank logs, the forged checks, and bile rose in my throat. All those years he had strutted through life, showered with praise, buying gifts and vacations that earned him the label of generous son. He hadn't been generous. He had been using my money. I booked a flight to Minneapolis that night. This wasn't a conversation for the phone. No, this needed to be face to face. If my parents still doubted, if Daniel dared to deny, I would place the evidence right in front of them and watch their illusions shatter. The 2-hour flight felt endless. My stomach twisted with every mile, rehearsing what I would say, bracing for every reaction: denial, outrage, excuses. My binder lay heavy in my lap, the physical weight of 8 years of betrayal. When I arrived, Mom had set out coffee and pastries as though it were any other family gathering. Dad looked confused but compliant. Daniel sat stiffly on the couch, feigning calm, though a flicker of unease betrayed him. I set the binder on the coffee table with a decisive thud. For the past 8 years, I began, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. I've been sending money every month. To you. Or at least, I thought it was to you. But you never saw a cent, did you? Mom shook her head, her brow furrowed. Emily, we told you we never received anything. I leaned forward. You didn't. Because Daniel took it all. Daniel's face flushed crimson. He shot to his feet. That's ridiculous. How dare you come here and throw wild accusations? Dad raised a hand. Emily, this is a very serious claim. Do you have any proof? Without a word, I opened the binder. Page after page of statements, highlighted transfers, signatures side by side, the forgery unmistakable. Trevor's report lay neatly clipped at the back. Mom's hands shook as she flipped through the forged checks. Dad's face drained of color, the paper trembling in his grip. Daniel's protests grew weaker, shifting from denial to excuses. I was going to pay it back. It was temporary. Just until I got back on my feet. 8 years is not temporary. I cut him off, my voice like steel. And you weren't struggling for most of that time. You were thriving. At Goldman Sachs, in your luxury apartment, you took my money because you felt entitled to it. Dad turned slowly to Daniel, his voice breaking. Tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't steal from your sister. Daniel looked away. His silence was an answer louder than any words. Mom crumpled, sobs racking her body. How could you, Daniel? To your own sister? To us? The golden child's facade collapsed. He sat hunched, face buried in his hands, the weight of his lies pressing down at last. I felt no triumph, only a hollow, aching sadness. This wasn't just about $75,000. This was about a lifetime of being unseen, a family dynamic poisoned by favoritism and blindness. I swallowed hard. The vacations. The gifts. The dinners you praised him for. They were paid with my money. Every gesture you celebrated it was me. But you never knew. Dad stood, turning his back to the room. His shoulders trembled, and for the first time in my life, I realized he was crying. All these years, he whispered, voice raw. We thought you didn't care, Emily. That you were too busy with your career. And all this time, you were the one supporting us. And we didn't even know it. Mom reached for my hand, tears streaming down her face. Can you ever forgive us? For not seeing you? For comparing you? For all the times we made you feel small? The words I had craved for decades now, cut deeper than any insult. Forgiveness? After everything? I stared at them, my heart torn between rage and longing. I didn't answer. Not yet. This was just the beginning. The living room was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator down the hall. My binder of evidence lay open on the coffee table like a weapon, its pages cutting deeper than any blade. Mom's sobs filled the air, raw and jagged, while Dad stood at the window, his back rigid, his hand pressed against the glass as though bracing himself against the weight of the truth. And Daniel, the golden boy, the untouchable son, sat slumped, his face buried in his palms. His silence screamed louder than his denials ever could. I drew a breath that trembled in my chest. There's more, I said, my voice low but unrelenting. The trips you thought Daniel paid for, the gifts, the expensive dinners, the generosity you praised him for, all of it was funded with my money. Dad turned then, his face pale, his eyes hollow. For the first time in my life, I saw not pride in his gaze, but devastation. Daniel, he whispered, his voice breaking. Tell me she's lying. Daniel lifted his head slowly, his eyes red, his face streaked with tears. He tried to speak, but the words fractured in his throat. His silence was an admission more damning than any confession. Mom's voice cracked like glass. How could you do this, Daniel? To your sister. To us. All those years you told us Emily didn't care, that she was selfish, too busy with her career. You were lying. You stole not just her money, you stole our daughter from us." Daniel's mask shattered completely. He shook his head, his voice hoarse. "I never meant for it to go this far. At first, I was in debt. Credit cards, overextended. When Emily sent that first payment, I told myself I'd borrow a little and pay it back. But then it was easy. Too easy. And then, it became survival. The more I lied, the more I needed. And then I couldn't stop. 8 years, Daniel, I spat, the fury I had bottled for a lifetime spilling free. 8 years of my life drained dry while you played the part of the successful son. 8 years I lived on scraps while you lived off me." Dad staggered, as though the weight of my words had struck him physically. He dropped into his armchair, his head in his hands. "I trusted you," he whispered. "We all trusted you." I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. "Trust is gone. Now comes accountability." I laid it in front of Daniel. Inside was the document Trevor had prepared, a meticulous account of the theft. Every transfer, every forged check. The total sum, $75,000. A statement of his actions ready for him to sign. Daniel stared at it, his jaw trembling. "You want me to sign this?" "Yes," I said coldly. "I want it in writing. Every dollar you took, every lie you told. You sign it and you agree to repayment. No more excuses, no more shadows." His hands shook as he picked up the pen. I'll sign. I'll pay it back. Every cent, no matter how long it takes." I leaned forward, my eyes boring into his. "Understand this, Daniel. This isn't about money anymore. This is about the years you stole from me. The lies that poisoned this family. You may repay the money, but you will never repay what you cost me." He nodded weakly, tears dripping onto the paper as he scribbled his name. Mom collapsed into the sofa, her sobs quiet now, more like the hollow gasps of someone grieving the death of something they once cherished. Dad finally looked up, his eyes wet, his voice rough. "We failed you, Emily. Not just by not seeing what Daniel was doing, but by not seeing you. For years, we measured you against him, never realizing you were building something greater, stronger, on your own terms. I don't know if we can fix that. But I want to try. If you'll let us." The words I had starved for my entire life hung in the air. For so long I had prayed to hear that I was enough, that I mattered. Now, finally, it was spoken. But it came too late, tangled in betrayal and ruin. "I don't know," I whispered honestly. My throat burned, my hands trembling. "This isn't just about money. This is about a lifetime of being told I wasn't enough, about being invisible in my own family. That doesn't disappear with one apology." Daniel finally looked at me, really looked at me, not as his younger sister, not as the lesser child, but as the person who had carried the burden of his deceit for nearly a decade. His voice cracked as he spoke. "For what it's worth, I am sorry. Not just for the money, but for everything. For being the standard you were measured against. For never standing up for you. For letting my own insecurities turn me into someone who could do this." I held his gaze, seeing him not as the golden child or the thief, but as a broken man crushed under the weight of his own lies. "Sorry doesn't undo the damage, Daniel. It's just the first step, and this road will be long." The air in the room was heavy, suffocating, but for the first time in years, the roles had shifted. No longer was I the invisible one. No longer was I the disappointment. I stood in that room as their equal, wounded, furious, but finally seen. When I left that night, the binder under my arm, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow, drained, yet strangely lighter. The truth had cost me more than I could measure, but it had freed me. For the first time, I walked out of my childhood home not as the lesser daughter, but as Emily Walker, the woman who had finally forced the truth into the light. The days after the confrontation felt like walking through the wreckage of a house fire, everything blackened, brittle, fragile. The truth had scorched away the illusions, and all that remained were ashes of a family built on comparisons and lies. For a while, the silence was unbearable. Calls from my parents came in, halting and tentative, their voices stripped of authority. Daniel's name no longer glowed in conversation. It hung heavy, a weight none of us knew how to carry. And then came the shock I didn't expect. 3 weeks after our confrontation, Dad called. His voice trembled, uncharacteristically small. "Emily, we've spoken with an attorney. We filed a police report." For a moment, I couldn't process his words. Police report? Against Daniel? The thought twisted my stomach. "It wasn't your responsibility to force this," Dad continued. "It was ours. He didn't just steal from you. He stole from all of us. From the family we thought we were. There have to be consequences." The legal process was brutal in its own right. Fraud. Forgery. The words leapt off court documents like barbed wire. Daniel, who had once been the family's shining trophy, now stood in a courtroom, his face pale under fluorescent lights, stripped of arrogance, stripped of pride. Because of the amount $75,000 and the length of his deception, the charges were serious. Ultimately, his lawyer negotiated a plea deal: restitution, probation, community service. No jail time, but a permanent record. I sat in the back of the courtroom the day he pled guilty, my binder of evidence clutched to my chest. My parents sat beside me, Mom silently weeping, Dad staring straight ahead like a man carved from stone. When the judge read the terms, Daniel nodded, his voice barely audible. "Yes, Your Honor." The sound of it should have satisfied me. For years I had dreamed of justice. Yet as I watched my brother shrink into a husk of the man he had pretended to be, there was no triumph. Only sorrow. This wasn't just punishment. It was the death of a myth, the golden child undone by his own greed. But the courtroom was only the beginning. The harder work came after, in the quiet spaces where wounds fester. 3 months later, Mom called with an unusual suggestion. "Emily, we've been thinking. Maybe we should try therapy. Together. As a family." The words nearly knocked me breathless. Therapy was not something my parents had ever entertained. Growing up, emotions were dismissed, vulnerabilities brushed aside. And now, after decades, they were asking for help? I agreed, hesitant, skeptical, but willing. That's how we found ourselves in the office of Dr. Margaret Lewis, a family therapist in Minneapolis. A woman with kind eyes, gray-streaked hair, and a voice calm enough to hold the storm we carried. The sessions were raw, jagged, and often unbearable. Mom confessed through tears, "We always favored Daniel. We couldn't see your value, Emily, because we were blinded by what we thought success was supposed to look like." Dad, who had spent a lifetime hiding behind pride, broke apart in front of us. "I saw in Daniel the life I wished I'd had, the status, the wealth. And in you, I saw something I didn't understand, so I dismissed it. That was my failure, not yours." Their words sliced through me, reopening wounds I thought had scarred. For so long, I had believed their neglect meant I wasn't enough. Now, I saw it for what it was: their own blindness, their own insecurities projected onto me. Dr. Lewis turned to me one afternoon. "Emily, you were conditioned from childhood to believe your worth was less. Breaking that conditioning isn't your job alone, it's the family's work too." For the first time, I felt the weight of responsibility shift. I wasn't the broken one. We all were. And Daniel? His path was even rockier. After court, he left Minneapolis, moving to Seattle to start over at a much smaller financial firm. His salary was a fraction of what it had once been. His reputation, once spotless, was scarred. Our contact was cautious. At first, a few stiff emails, then occasional phone calls, conversations full of pauses, guarded words. A year after the confrontation, he admitted during one call, "I'm in therapy too. My therapist thinks I was terrified of losing my place as the favorite, that I clung to this fake image of success because I couldn't face being ordinary." I asked quietly, "And what do you think?" There was a long pause. Then his voice, ragged, almost broken. "I think I was jealous of you, of your authenticity. You built something real, Emily, while I was just pretending." Hearing those words shook me to my core. For years, I had seen him as the giant I could never measure against. Now, he was admitting he had envied me all along. Meanwhile, my own life shifted. With the time and energy I had once spent chasing their approval, I poured myself fully into Prism Design. The studio flourished. I expanded, hired more designers, moved into a larger space. Industry magazines featured my work. I traveled to conferences not as a guest, but as a speaker. But beyond professional triumphs, I built something far more valuable, a support network of people who saw me for who I was. Rachel, my college roommate, moved to Chicago after her divorce. We reconnected, our friendship deeper, forged by survival. I started dating Michael, an architect who admired not just my work but my spirit, who encouraged me to dream bigger. For the first time, my life wasn't defined by comparison, it was defined by authenticity. 2 years after the confrontation, I invited my parents to Chicago. I wanted them to see not the daughter they had dismissed, not the lesser child, but the woman I had become. They walked into my studio, eyes wide, gazing at the bustling space, the designers working, the awards on the wall. Dad's voice cracked as he whispered, "This is incredible, Emily. Truly. We never saw you before, but we see you now." Mom, holding a brochure I had designed for a children's literacy campaign, wiped away tears. "We missed so much," she said softly. "We missed you." That evening, over dinner, Dad raised his glass. His voice shook as he spoke. "To Emily, who succeeded not because of our support, but despite our failure to give it. We are proud of you. Not for what you've achieved, though it's remarkable, but for who you are." The words wrapped around me like a balm, soothing wounds that had bled for decades. They didn't erase the past. They never could. But they acknowledged it. And in that moment, I realized the most important truth of all. My worth had never depended on them. It was mine all along. The confrontation and court case had ended. But the aftershocks lingered like tremors long after an earthquake. For decades, my family had lived in a fantasy. Daniel as the golden son, me as the overlooked daughter. That illusion was shattered now, and what remained was a raw, unrecognizable truth. I had to learn something I'd never been allowed before. How to set boundaries. At first, it felt unnatural. For years, I had been conditioned to say yes to financial help, yes to sacrifices, yes to carrying burdens that were never mine. So when Mom called one evening, her voice tentative, asking if I could help out just a little, with some unexpected medical costs, my entire body stiffened. The old reflex screamed at me to give in, to fix it, to keep peace. But something inside me, hardened by betrayal, stood firm. "No," I said quietly but firmly. "Not this time." There was a long silence. Then Mom's shaky sigh. "I understand. The world didn't collapse. They didn't disown me. The sky didn't fall." For the first time, I realized the power of a single word. Number. Meanwhile, Daniel began the long crawl out of the pit he had dug for himself. Under the restitution order, he was required to repay the $75,000 in installments. Every month, a deposit arrived in my account smaller than what he had stolen, but steady. The first time I saw it, my stomach twisted. The money felt tainted, like blood money. But as the months passed, each deposit became less about the past and more about accountability. It was proof that the burden was no longer mine to carry alone. One evening, Daniel called. His voice was subdued, stripped of the arrogance I'd grown up with. "I made the latest payment," he said. "It'll take years, I know, but I'll finish it. I owe you that much." 1. I closed my eyes, the ache in my chest both heavy and strangely lighter. "You owe me more than money, Daniel. You owe me honesty. And respect. That's what I'll be watching." For once, he didn't argue. "You're right," he whispered. My parents, too, struggled with the new reality. Gone were the days when they could hold Daniel up as the shining standard. Their dinner conversations no longer revolved around his latest promotion or his luxury vacations. Instead, they sat with the uncomfortable silence of truth. Therapy with Dr. Lewis became their lifeline. In one session, Dad admitted, "I don't know how to see myself without Daniel's success. I built my identity on his achievements. Now, I don't know who I am." Mom added through tears, I thought loving one child meant pushing the other harder, comparing her, hoping she'd rise to meet him. I didn't realize I was crushing her instead. Hearing them say those words was like pressing on an old wound. It hurt, but it was also healing. For the first time, they weren't denying. They weren't excusing. They were facing it. And me? I began to breathe differently. Without the constant drain of $800 a month, my finances stabilized. I paid off the last of my student loans, built savings, even started a retirement account, small steps towards security I had never dared to imagine. Prism Design expanded into a larger office. I hired 3 new designers and a project manager, freeing myself from the 70-hour weeks that had once consumed me. For the first time, I could take vacations, real ones. Trips with Rachel to the mountains. A weekend getaway with Michael to New Orleans. Moments of life I had missed while chained to obligation. One evening, sitting in my sunlit apartment with a glass of wine, I realized I was free. Not just financially, but emotionally. Free from the endless comparison. Free from the belief that my worth hinged on my parents' approval. But freedom didn't erase the scars. There were nights when the bitterness returned like a tide. Memories of birthdays ignored, achievements dismissed, years stolen. There were mornings when I looked in the mirror and still saw the shadow of the lesser child. Dr. Lewis reminded me gently, "Healing isn't about erasing the past, Emily. It's about living with it differently. Your scars are proof you survived." And so I tried. The true test came one Thanksgiving. My parents invited both Daniel and me home, insisting it was time to try a new tradition. Walking into that house, the memories rushed back, the endless comparisons at the dinner table, the way relatives praised Daniel while pitying me. But this time, the atmosphere was different. The meal was quiet, subdued. No gushing about promotions or expensive trips. No subtle digs about art being a hobby. Instead, Dad asked me about my latest campaign. Mom passed around one of my studio's brochures like it was a prized artifact. And Daniel, he sat across from me, shoulders slumped, humility etched into his face. When dessert was served, he raised his glass awkwardly. "To Emily," he said. His voice shook. "For carrying this family when no one else would. For succeeding when no one believed in her. For being the strongest of us." The room went silent. My parents' eyes filled with tears. My chest tightened, emotions tangling until I could barely speak. Finally, I nodded. "Thank you." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was acknowledgement, and for me that was a beginning. When I left that night, the crisp Minnesota air stung my lungs, and for the first time in years I didn't feel like I was leaving as the invisible daughter. I was leaving as myself, seen, acknowledged, no longer defined by anyone else's shadow. For a time, I thought the worst was behind us. The fraud was exposed. Daniel was repaying what he stole. My parents, broken but willing, were stumbling their way through therapy. And me, I was finally carving out a life free from the old chains. But healing is never a straight line. Sometimes, it requires ripping away even deeper bandages to expose the wounds beneath. It began with a conversation in Dr. Lewis's office. We were mid-session, discussing boundaries, when she asked my parents gently, "What did you believe about Emily all those years she was sending money?" Mom answered quickly, almost defensively. "We thought she wasn't sending anything. Daniel told us, well, he told us she didn't care." My stomach dropped. "He told you what?" Mom's eyes filled with regret. "He said you were too busy with your career, that you had no interest in helping, no interest in family. He said you thought supporting us was his responsibility, not yours." The air crackled, my pulse pounding. "So all those years, when I called and you sounded cold, when you looked at me like I was selfish, it was because Daniel was poisoning you against me?" Dad nodded slowly, shame clouding his features. "Every time you didn't call, he'd point it out. Every missed holiday, he'd remind us. He painted a picture of you as distant, self-absorbed, careless, and we believed him." I felt the room tilt, fury igniting in my chest. It wasn't enough for him to steal my money, he had to steal my place in this family too. The revelation gutted me. For 8 years, I hadn't just been invisible, I had been painted as a villain in my own family story. Every sigh from Mom, every disappointed glance from Dad, every awkward holiday silence, it hadn't been a void. It had been filled with lies, Daniel whispered, weaving a narrative where he was the dutiful son and I was the selfish daughter. I replayed the memories with new eyes. The Thanksgiving where Dad snapped. At least Daniel shows up. The Christmas when Mom muttered, "Daniel always makes time for us." Those words had burned for years, convincing me I was unlovable, unworthy. Now I knew the truth. Daniel had fed them those lines, drip by drip, until they saw me through his lens. And the cruelest part? I had believed it too. After the session, I confronted Daniel over the phone. My voice trembled, not from fear but from rage. "You didn't just steal my money," I spat. "You stole me. You turned our parents against me. You let them think I didn't care while I was breaking myself to keep them alive." No. There was a long silence. Then his voice, low and wrecked. "I know, and I hate myself for it." "Why?" I demanded. "Why wasn't taking my money enough? Why did you need to destroy me in their eyes too?" He exhaled shakily. "Because if they saw you as the good one, I'd lose everything. Their love, their pride, their belief in me. I couldn't stand the thought of being ordinary, of being less than you. So I lied. I kept lying until I didn't know how to stop. That." His words were knives, twisting deeper with every syllable. He hadn't just envied me, he had feared me. Feared that my quiet strength, my authenticity, would outshine his hollow success. And so, to protect his image, he had buried me. The weight of it crushed me. Nights became sleepless, my mind replaying every moment of neglect through this new lens. The memories weren't just painful anymore, they were poisoned, rewritten by Daniel's manipulation. I would never get those years back. The birthdays spent alone, the graduations they skipped, the pride I longed for but never received it, had all been stolen twice over. First by their favoritism, then by his lies. Some nights, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, tears streaking into my hair, whispering to myself, "It wasn't me. It was never me." Dr. Lewis urged me to hold on to that truth. "Emily, you weren't invisible. You were erased. But now the truth is known, and you have the power to write yourself back into your story." Meanwhile, my parents unraveled under the weight of realization. Mom wept in almost every session. "All those times I scolded you for not calling. All those moments I told relatives you were too focused on your work." I was repeating Daniel's lies. "I made you the villain in front of everyone. My God, what have I done?" Dad's shame was quieter, but heavier. I wanted to believe him because it was easier, because it let me hold on to the illusion of Daniel as perfect. Admitting the truth that you were the one sacrificing meant admitting I had failed as a father. So I chose the lie. Their remorse was real, but it didn't erase the years of damage. Forgiveness felt like an ocean I wasn't ready to cross. Still, something shifted. The next holiday, when relatives gathered, Dad stood at the head of the table and did something unthinkable. He cleared his throat, his voice shaking. "I need to set the record straight. For years, you all thought Emily was the distant one, the selfish one. That was never true. She's the one who carried us." Quietly, while Daniel... His voice faltered, but he forced it out. While Daniel was stealing from her. The room gasped. Relatives turned wide-eyed toward me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't pitied or dismissed, I was seen. The truth had finally shattered the story that had bound me for so long. And Daniel? He sat at the far end of the table, eyes downcast, his face pale. The golden sun no longer glittered. He was just a man exposed. Walking out that night, the winter air biting my cheeks, I felt both hollow and whole. The lies had stolen years I could never reclaim, but the truth had finally cut through. I wasn't invisible anymore. I never had been. I had been erased, and now I was writing myself back. The revelation of Daniel's manipulation ripped through our family like an earthquake, leaving nothing intact. The illusion of the golden sun was gone, and in its place stood a man stripped bare, a thief, a liar, a brother who had devoured not only my money but my very place in the family. The fallout was brutal. Relatives who had once fawned over Daniel now avoided him at gatherings. Old friends stopped calling. Neighbors whispered. His name, once spoken with admiration, became a cautionary tale. Mom, once his fiercest defender, could barely look at him without tears. Dad, who had built his pride on Daniel's accomplishments, now flinched at the sound of his voice. The pedestal was gone, and without it, Daniel was nothing but a man standing in ruins of his own making. And me, I was left with a choice that weighed heavier than any burden I had carried before. In therapy, Dr. Lewis posed the question I dreaded. Emily, what do you want to do with this truth? Do you want to rebuild with your brother, or do you want to let go entirely? The thought of forgiveness felt impossible. Every scar screamed against it. 8 years of theft. 8 years of lies. 8 years where my parents' love was weaponized against me. How could I forgive that? And yet, the thought of cutting him off completely twisted me in another way. He was still my brother. We had shared childhood bedrooms, family vacations, memories of fireflies in Minnesota summers. Could I truly sever that thread, however frayed it had become? I lay awake at night, the question gnawing at me. Am I strong enough to forgive, or strong enough to walk away? Daniel didn't make the decision easier. One evening, he showed up unannounced at my studio. His once polished appearance was gone, suit jackets replaced with wrinkled shirts, eyes shadowed with fatigue. He stood in the doorway like a ghost. Emily, he said, his voice low, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to speak to me. But I needed you to know. I'm trying, I'm in therapy. I'm paying back the money. I'm applying for jobs. I'm not who I was, but I'm trying not to be that man anymore. I studied him, searching for sincerity. His shoulders slumped. His eyes avoided mine. He was no longer the golden boy. No longer the arrogant brother. He was broken, but brokenness didn't erase the damage. You destroyed me, Daniel, I said quietly, my voice shaking. Not just financially. You destroyed my relationship with Mom and Dad. You let me believe I wasn't loved, wasn't worthy. For 8 years, you let me carry guilt that never belonged to me. No. He flinched, tears brimming in his eyes. I know. And I will regret it for the rest of my life. But please, don't let me be dead to you. Not completely. His words hung heavy in the air. At Thanksgiving that year, the divide was clear. The table was quieter, conversations forced. Daniel sat at one end, isolated, while I sat at the other, my parents hovering between us like diplomats at war. When dessert was served, Dad raised his glass. His voice trembled. To Emily, our daughter who carried us when we didn't even see her. We are proud of you, and we are sorry for every year we failed you. The relatives murmured agreement, eyes turning toward me with newfound respect. But the words landed like bittersweet arrows. Pride now couldn't erase years of dismissal. Apologies couldn't rewrite the past. I nodded, accepting their toast, but my gaze drifted to Daniel. He stared into his plate, shoulders hunched, a man undone. And in that moment, I felt the full weight of the choice before me. After the gathering, Daniel caught me outside as I walked to my car. The cold air stung my cheeks, his breath visible in the night. I know you don't owe me anything, he said, his voice trembling. But please, Emily, don't give up on me completely. If you cut me out, I'll understand. But I'm begging you, don't let this be the end. I stood there, my keys cold in my hand, my heart torn between rage and compassion. In his eyes, I saw not the brother who had betrayed me, but the boy I once knew, the one who had taught me to ride a bike, who had cheered at my first art show before pride twisted into envy. But those memories collided with the pain of adulthood, with the years of lies, with the emptiness of being unseen. Could I hold both truths? Could I keep him in my life without letting him poison me again? That night, back in my apartment, I stared out at the Chicago skyline, lights shimmering against the dark. Forgiveness wasn't a gift I was ready to give. But hatred was a weight I no longer wanted to carry. So I whispered to the night, to myself more than to him. I won't forget, I won't excuse, but maybe I won't cut him out completely, not yet. But it wasn't resolution, It wasn't peace. It was something messier, harder, the beginning of living with the scars instead of pretending they weren't there. 2 years after the confrontation, the landscape of my life looked unrecognizable. The scars were still there, jagged, permanent, but scars are proof of survival, and survival had turned into something more: strength, clarity, freedom. Prism Design had flourished beyond what I once thought possible. My team had doubled, our campaigns winning national recognition. I traveled across the country, speaking about creativity and resilience. My story no longer a secret shame, but a testament to endurance. But the real transformation wasn't professional, it was personal. For the first time in my life, I woke up each morning without the weight of invisible chains. No transfers draining my bank account. No desperate calls begging for scraps of approval. No shadow of Daniel looming over every step. I wasn't living to prove myself anymore. I was living for me. My parents, broken by truth but slowly rebuilding, had softened in ways I never thought possible. Mom called not to gush about Daniel, but to ask about my projects. She even flew to Chicago once, surprising me by attending an exhibit of my team's work. Her eyes glistened as she whispered, "I'm so proud of you." The words, though late, landed like balm, not a cure but a healing touch. Dad, too, changed. The man who once measured success only in titles and trophies now measured it in honesty. One evening over dinner, he said quietly, "You taught me more than any of Daniel's achievements ever did. You taught me resilience. And for that, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you as my daughter." I didn't forgive instantly. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't a single moment, it's a series of choices, day after day. But I allowed space for them, space they had once denied me. And Daniel, our relationship remained complicated, a fragile dance between guilt and tentative hope. He continued making restitution payments, every month a reminder of the debt that could never be fully repaid. We spoke occasionally, short, cautious conversations. Sometimes he apologized. Other times he simply asked how I was. He never pretended we were whole again, and I never pretended to trust him. But there was something in the trying, in the slow rebuilding of something that could never be what it was, but might become something different. The boy I once adored, the man who betrayed me, I carried both truths in my heart, and maybe that was enough. But the real victory wasn't in their changes. It was in mine. I had learned to say no without guilt. I had learned that love without respect is not love at all. I had learned that boundaries are not walls to shut people out, they are doors that allow only the worthy to enter. Most of all, I had learned that my worth was never theirs to give or take. It had always been mine. On my 35th birthday, Rachel and Michael gathered friends at my apartment. Laughter filled the rooms, glasses clinked, music played. At one point, Rachel raised her glass. "To Emily," she said, grinning. "The strongest woman I know. Proof that no matter how deep the betrayal,